Okay, so there's an interesting idea being floated around by the Trump administration and DOGE about what to do with all the extra cash that they have been finding and cutting out of the government. Now, I've seen the proposal. It seems serious. Whether it's going to happen, I don't know. But check out this clip of Trump talking about the proposal in his speech. Roll it.
Finding tremendous abuse, waste, and fraud in Social Security. Social Security is what's happening there is going to be one of the great potential scandals in history. On the program, there are over 4.7 million Social Security numbers from people from 100 years old to 109. Think of that. Now, over 100, there aren't a lot of people that make it. Hopefully, most of the people in this room will make it.
In an exclusive interview with Sean Hannity, Elon Musk explaining the importance of his cost-cutting actions at DOGE.
I really want to emphasize to people that this is a very important point. If we don't solve the deficit, there won't be money for medical care. There won't be money for Social Security. We either solve the deficit, or all we'll be doing is paying debt. It's got to be solved, or there's no medical care, there's no Social Security, there's no nothing. It's got to be solved. It's not optional. America will go bankrupt if this is not done. That's why I'm here.
It's important for people to understand he's doing a big job. He's doing a very thankless job. It's really a thankless job. But he's helping us to save our country. Our country was in serious trouble. And I had to get the best guy.
All right, so let's check out this letter that was posted on X by James Fishback. He is one of the DOGE advisors. So I'm just going to read off the letter. They're using the DOGE savings, which is $2 trillion. They're going to take 20% of that, which equals $400 billion, and returning it to the 79 million households that will be the net payers of the federal income tax in calendar year 2025 as a tax refund. So the 400 billion divided by 79 million is the DOGE check, 500,000. If you're not a net payer of the federal tax income, or if you are someone who doesn't, work or pay into the system, you don't pay an income tax, you probably live off of the government, you will probably not see any of this money. But let's take a look at Fishback talking about his proposal on News Nation. Roll it.
This should be called the Fishback discount. That's the guy who came up with it. It came from James Fishback, an investor who's one of the advisors to DOGE. And he said, you know what we should do? When we save all this money, we should give some of it back to the American family. Let's do 20%. We hit our $2 trillion target. That'll be $5 grand each. Sounds great. Musk said, I'll take it to president. So with the president, he loves the idea. Remember during the pandemic, he wanted to sign everybody's check. It wasn't even his money. It won't be this time either. But what a great idea. Can they do it? Should they do it? Let's bring in the man who deserves the credit for the idea, James Fishback. There he is. Could you have ever imagined when you first suggested this idea that you would be here with me discussing why President Trump is saying that this is now definitely going to happen?
Well, Chris, good evening. It is a humbling and honoring day to have the president's endorsement on this idea. I'm appreciative of the credit, but I got to tell you the truth. The credit goes to President Trump. DOGE, this savings would not be possible without his leadership. We put it to paper, but President Trump is going to be the one to execute it, and he deserves the credit for it.
So, James, Bill O'Reilly doesn't want the check. I want the check. I'll take his check, too. I don't know how it works. But here's the thing. As you know, right, you're an investor, and you know when you sit at the table, people want you to underpromise and overdeliver, okay? The idea, why? Because then they're happy with the surprise. Here, isn't there a concern that setting that target of $2 trillion is way too high, and that people think they're going to get $5 grand, but now if you don't get the $2 trillion, they don't get the $5 grand?
Well, it's interesting, Chris. I don't think it's actually too high. I think it's totally reasonable. But here's the thing. The DOGE dividend check that President Trump endorsed today, that is going to help us get the $2 trillion, and here's why. We're going to incentivize everyday Americans, whether they're in East Palestine or in East Baltimore, to step up and say, there's waste, there's fraud, there's abuse in my community. report it to Doge. Why? Because the more money the Doge saves, the bigger the Doge dividend check is. Chris, look at how successful Doge has been under Trump's leadership, with just Elon Musk and a dozen engineers eating Chick-fil-A and drinking Red Bull, sleeping in the office. Now imagine deputizing 100 million Americans to be the eyes and ears on the ground. When I was growing up, I took my grandfather, a World War II vet, to the VA for his checkups. And I got to tell you, I saw waste, I saw fraud, I saw abuse. I didn't have Doge to report it to, and I didn't have an incentive to report it. That's not the case with the Doge dividend. Every American can step up, report fraud and abuse to Doge directly via X, and we'll see the savings go up, hit $2 trillion, and we'll see the checks dispersed next summer. And absolutely, President Trump's name and signature should be on it, because this would not have been possible without his leadership.
Let's take a guess. Take a guess on who you think is trying to fight against this proposal. It's the Democrats.
Giving some of the savings from Doge back to Americans as kind of a dividend. Would you support that?
Listen, he's just telling a lie. He's not the one that had anything to do with the $1,200 refunds that people had during the midst of COVID that was done by a Democratic House and Democratic Senate. Right now, what they're going to do is say, hey, we want to give you a refund, but Congress won't let us, because they already know that there's just no money for that. The only reason that those refunds came before was because we were living in different times. This was a time in which hopefully we won't ever go through again. We had a once in a lifetime pandemic. The bad part is that I don't know if it's once in a lifetime, because we know that Ebola, unfortunately, was detected right here in New York here recently. And if we continue down this road of getting rid of scientists or deciding that we don't want to rely on experts as it relates to what they're telling us to do, or we don't want to deal with vaccines and medicine in this country, then we may be facing not only our next pandemic, but our next 2, 3, or 4 pandemics because of their incompetence. So no, we are not in the business of giving out money. And honestly, I don't know what $5,000 will do for you.
So the Democrats aren't for handing out this money back to the taxpayers, but at the same time, in the same sentence, they're literally taking credit for, handing out the COVID checks in the midst of the COVID pandemic, because we know that this is the money that Doge has found and saved and cut out of the government, all the waste, fraud, and abuse. And now Doge wants to give it back to the taxpayers and also pay down the debt with the other 20%. So it's extremely odd to take this position to be against this. Extremely odd. They would have to come up with a very, very good way of rebutting this whole thing without, exposing themselves to being called hypocrites, because they are. To expose the hypocrisy even a little bit. The Doge checks are kind of like restitutions for Americans. That's kind of like how I'm thinking about it. But you have people in the Democratic Party like Jasmine Crockett who are literally out here proposing reparations for black people. But as soon as you try to propose something that's for all Americans, she's no longer for restitutions.
This past week, I saw, I don't remember which celebrity, but it was actually a celebrity. And I was like, I don't know that that's not necessarily a bad idea, but I'd have to think through it a lot. One of the things that they propose is black folk not have to pay taxes for a certain amount of time, because then again, that puts money back in your pocket. But at the same time, it may not be as objectionable to some people about actually giving out dollars. But obviously then you start dealing with the different tax brackets and things like that. And that's one of the reasons that, we argue the reparations make sense, because so many black folk, not only do you owe for the labor that was stolen and killed and all the other things, right? But the fact is, we end up being so far behind, right? And so it's how do you bring forth people? Exactly. And so it's if you do the no tax thing for people that are already, say, struggling and aren't really paying taxes in the first place, it doesn't really exactly.
They may want those checks like they got during COVID.
Exactly.
So give money to blacks, but don't give money to all Americans is essentially what she's advocating for, along with other Democrats. To give my quick opinion on the Doge checks, since they've managed to save a ton of money, in the last couple months, $2 trillion to be exact, I have to say I'm not really at all surprised that they have decided to float this idea of giving it back to the taxpayer. That actually makes sense to me. Why wouldn't you do that? And it wouldn't really make much sense to, print the money like you would for reparations. So why not give it to the Americans? If you pay for a service or an item in, out here in the real world, outside of government, and then let's say the item is defective or the service that you got was not up to standard, it makes sense that you would ask for a refund, and you would most likely get a refund. Now, why is it not okay for the federal government to have a office that audits the federal government and then gives that money back to taxpayers? Why can't we do that? That sounds like a common sense thing. If they can find $2 trillion, if they can cut $2 trillion and give it back to Americans instead of foreign countries like the Democrats want to do, I think every American would, or most, would see that as a win. I mean, again, the Democrats just want to oppose everything that the other side proposes instead of using their brains, to align with the good things instead of outright rejecting the entire thing. Obviously, the Democrats are not against handing out money, but they are against handing out money in this certain situation, although I wouldn't frame this as a handout. But anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, and I'll see you later. Peace.